challenge sounded simple at first, almost like a story told to impress new recruits. Elite American Special Forces, confident from brutal training and real combat experience, believed they could match any unit in the world. Across the Atlantic, British Commandos carried a quieter reputation, built on patience, precision, and missions that rarely made headlines. When these two forces finally crossed paths in a high-stakes joint operation, nobody expected the outcome to shake confidence on both sides. What began as a test of strength quickly became a lesson in humility, and the moment the Americans realized what they were truly facing came far too late to turn back. If you enjoy real stories of hidden military history told with cinematic detail, make sure you like this video and subscribe to Clandestine Combat, because the story you're about to hear is one most people have never been told. The setting was tense, the kind of pressure that only exists when reputation is on the line. American operators arrive with speed, energy, and the belief that aggression wins battles. British commandos arrived differently calm, observant, almost silent. To outside observers, that silence looked like hesitation. To those who understood commando warfare, it was calculation. Plans were discussed, routes were mapped, and strategies quietly compared. The Americans pushed for rapid action, convinced momentum would overwhelm any obstacle. The British advised patience, warning that the terrain, the enemy patterns, and the unseen risks demanded something slower and far more deliberate. Confidence met experience in a way that felt polite on the surface but competitive underneath. Then, the exercise began, and within minutes, the tone shifted. Movements that looked invisible suddenly mattered. Sounds that seemed harmless suddenly gave away positions. The Americans advanced exactly as trained, fast, decisive, powerful, and that was the moment the trap revealed itself. British commandos, already positioned where no one expected them to be, controlled the pace without firing a single real shot. Communication lines were quietly cut in the simulation. Supply routes were exposed. Leadership positions were symbolically neutralized before the main assault even understood what was happening. It wasn't chaos. It was precision, unfolding step by step. For the first time, confidence turned into confusion. Highly trained soldiers searched for an enemy they couldn't see, reacting to a battlefield that no longer followed their assumptions. Every move forward created another, unseen disadvantage. Every attempt to regain control had already been anticipated. What was meant to prove dominance was becoming something else, entirely a demonstration that warfare at the highest level is not about who moves first, but who understands the fight before it begins. And in that quiet realization, the Americans faced a truth few elite units ever admit out loud. They had underestimated the opponent standing right beside them. What made the situation even more unsettling was how calm the British commandos remained while the pressure grew. There was no celebration, no visible urgency, and no rush to exploit the advantage they had created. Instead, they continued to move with the same controlled rhythm, as if the outcome had been decided long before the first step of the exercise. To the American operators, this calmness felt unfamiliar. They were trained to dominate through speed and overwhelming force, to seize initiative and never release it. Yet here they were, reacting instead of controlling, searching instead of striking, and realizing that raw intensity alone could not solve a battlefield already shaped by someone else's planning. Small details began to reveal the deeper difference in philosophy between the two forces. The Americans focused on action, how fast a door could be breached, how quickly ground could be taken, how aggressively resistance could be crushed. The British commandos focused on understanding where the enemy would move before they moved, which path would never be suspected, which silence would speak louder than gunfire. One approach relied on momentum, the other relied on inevitability. And in this controlled but unforgiving scenario, inevitability was winning. Attempts to adapt came quickly. American team leaders shifted formations, redirected, simulated firepower, and tried to re-establish communication across the field. These were not ordinary soldiers. They were among the most capable fighters in the world. But adaptation under pressure is different from preparation before contact. Each adjustment solved the last mistake while unknowingly stepping into the next problem already waiting for them. The British Commandos were not simply reacting, but they had designed the environment so reaction itself became a disadvantage. Observers watching the joint operation began to understand that something rare was unfolding. This was not a failure of courage, skill, or discipline. It was a collision between two different interpretations of modern warfare. One believed dominance could be forced. The other believed victory could be arranged quietly in advance. The lesson forming in real time was uncomfortable, but undeniable. The loudest power on the battlefield is often the easiest to predict. As the scenario pushed forward, tensions shifted into reflection. Pride is powerful inside elite units, and respect is never given lightly. Yet, even in the middle of simulated defeat, something important was changing. Frustration slowly gave way to curiosity. Instead of asking how to win faster, American operators began asking a different question. How had the British Commandos seen everything coming before it happened? That question, more than any tactical movement, marked the true turning point of the encounter, because this story was never really about one side beating the other. It was about the moment elite warriors discover a blind spot in their own thinking, and once that blind spot is revealed, nothing about the way they fight can ever remain exactly the same again. The realization did not arrive all at once. It spread slowly through brief radio exchanges and the subtle change in body language that only professionals notice. For the elite American forces, the battlefield had turned unfamiliar, shaped by patience instead of pressure. Every instinct told them to move faster, but the more force they applied, the more the situation tightened around them. What unsettled them wasn't losing a training scenario. It was the feeling of being studied in advance. A team leader later described it as fighting a plan instead of people. Plans do not panic. Plans simply unfold. The British Commandos' strength was not dramatic. It was invisible, built with a discipline that was untouchable until the exact second it needed to be seen. Still, pride pushed the Americans to attempt one final maneuver. They slowed their movement, controlled their aggression, and for a brief moment, it seemed the balance might shift. And then, just as quietly as before, the illusion collapsed. The British Commandos revealed a secondary layer of positioning that had never been detected. The final move ended not with noise, but with the silence of complete control. When the exercise was called, something far more valuable than victory had formed. Respect. The quiet respect professionals carry when they recognize mastery. The Americans had not simply faced another elite unit. They had faced a different philosophy of war, one built on shaping events before the first move is ever made. And once seen, that philosophy could never be ignored again. In the hours after the exercise ended, the atmosphere shifted to quiet analysis. Among elite soldiers, hard lessons are treated with seriousness because they carry the potential to save lives. What became clear was how differently the two forces defined control. For the Americans, it meant seizing the initiative. For the British Commandos, it meant shaping the environment so completely that an enemy's choices were limited before contact even occurred. Stories of the encounter began to circulate, not as embarrassment, but as education. The lesson was simple, but powerful. Speed without understanding creates exposure. Quietly, training methods evolved. American operators began placing greater emphasis on deception and patience. The British, in turn, studied the Americans' intensity and adaptability. Mutual respect had turned into mutual learning. The real outcome lived not in headlines, but in planning rooms and the mindset of soldiers preparing for missions the world would never hear about. Because the deepest impact of elite competition is rarely humiliation. It is growth. The moment a warrior recognizes a weakness is the same moment improvement begins. That is why the story still matters as proof that even the strongest must keep learning. Time passed, missions changed, and new conflicts demanded attention in distant parts of the world. Yet the memory of that joint encounter never fully disappeared. Among professionals, certain moments become reference points, quiet reminders, carried into future operations. The Americans who had stood inside that carefully controlled defeat did not forget the feeling of moving through a battlefield shaped by someone else's design. Instead, they carried that discomfort forward and turned it into preparation. Years later, during real deployments where uncertainty was constant and consequences were no longer simulated, the influence of that lesson began to appear. Planning sessions grew longer and more deliberate. Reconnaissance received greater patience. Routes were questioned instead of accepted. Silence, once seen as hesitation, became a tool. Operators who had learned the cost of assumption started asking deeper questions before the first step of any mission. Not because they doubted their strength, but because they understood strength alone was never enough. Across the ocean, British commandos were changing as well. Exposure to American speed and relentless pressure revealed its own advantages. Situations existed where hesitation could be more dangerous than risk, where decisive movement prevented an enemy from organizing resistance. The calm precision that defined commando doctrine began to blend with sharper bursts of controlled aggression. Two philosophies that once felt opposed slowly started to merge, shaped by shared experience rather than rivalry. This quiet exchange of ideas rarely appears in public histories of warfare. Books often focus on dramatic victories, famous commanders, or battles measured in territory gained. But inside the world of special operations, evolution happens differently. It grows from conversations after training, from observations during joint missions, from respect earned without ceremony. The encounter that once felt like regret gradually transformed into something far more valuable, a foundation for cooperation, built on honesty instead of pride. New generations of operators eventually heard fragments of the story, not as a warning meant to discourage confidence, but as a reminder to balance it with awareness. Instructors described how even the most capable force can overlook what seems too quiet to matter. They explained that true mastery is not proven by never being surprised, but by learning faster than the next challenge can appear. The message was simple, direct, and impossible to ignore. The battlefield rewards those who listen as carefully as they act, and somewhere within those lessons lived the deeper meaning of the encounter. It was never about Americans versus British commandos. It was about the moment elite warriors confronted the limits of their own assumptions and chose growth instead of denial. That choice, repeated across years of training and real operations, shaped missions that saved lives far beyond the original exercise. For those who follow stories like this on Clandestine Combat, the real power is not in who won a simulation long ago. It is in understanding how humility, respect, and relentless learning quietly shape the outcomes of conflicts most people will never see. In the world of special operations, the most important victories are often invisible. They happen long before a mission begins, inside briefing rooms filled with maps, satellite images, and quiet concentration. Decisions made in those rooms determine whether soldiers walk into chaos or step into control. After the encounter between the American forces and the British commandos, something subtle but permanent changed inside those spaces. Planning was no longer just about strength and speed. It became about perception, about seeing what others might miss, and preparing for threats that had not yet revealed themselves. Veteran operators began teaching younger recruits a different way to think about dominance. True dominance, they explained, is not loud. It does not always arrive with helicopters, explosions, or overwhelming force. Sometimes it arrives through patience so complete that the enemy never realizes the fight was decided hours earlier. This mindset required discipline that went beyond physical endurance. It demanded emotional control, intellectual curiosity, and the humility to question even the most trusted instincts. Those qualities are harder to measure than marksmanship or fitness, yet they often decide survival. The influence of British commando philosophy could now be felt in subtle adjustments across training exercises. Scenarios became less predictable. Opposing forces were encouraged to deceive rather than simply resist. Success was measured not only by objectives captured, but by how intelligently those objectives were approached. American instructors, once focused heavily on aggression and tempo, began rewarding restraint when restraint created advantage. It was not a replacement of identity, but an expansion of its strength, guided by deeper awareness. At the same time, joint cooperation between allied special forces grew stronger. Trust built through honest competition is different from trust formed through diplomacy alone. When soldiers witness each other's strengths and weaknesses in demanding conditions, respect becomes real. That respect improves communication during real missions, where hesitation can cost lives. The earlier challenge that once felt uncomfortable had quietly strengthened the partnership it seemed to test. Stories continued to circulate within the tight circles of those who serve in silence. They were told carefully, without exaggeration, and always with purpose. Each retelling focused less on defeat and more on transformation. Younger operators listened closely, understanding that they were inheriting lessons paid for by someone else's hard experience. In elite communities, this is how knowledge survives passed from one generation to the next, refined but never forgotten. And for viewers here on Clandestine Combat, this is where the story becomes more than military history. It becomes a reflection on mastery itself. Whether on a battlefield, in leadership, or in any high-pressure pursuit, the greatest danger is often the belief that we already understand everything we face. The moment confidence closes the door to learning is the moment vulnerability begins to grow unseen. That is why the encounter still matters today. Not because of rivalry, and not because of regret, but because it proves a timeless truth. The strongest warriors are the ones who never stop adapting, even after they believe they have reached the top. Adaptation, however, is never a single moment. It is a continuous process shaped by pressure, memory, and the quiet determination to improve without recognition. Inside elite units, progress rarely feels dramatic. There are no sudden announcements declaring that thinking has changed. Instead, transformation reveals itself through small differences. Extra pause before movement, the deeper analysis of terrain, the willingness to consider what an unseen opponent might already know. These changes are subtle, but in environments where seconds decide survival, subtlety becomes power. Operators who trained after that encounter inherited a mindset they did not fully witness, yet they felt its presence in every demanding exercise. Instructors pushed them to question easy answers. Routes that looked obvious were treated with suspicion. Success achieved too quickly was examined for hidden risk. The purpose was not to create hesitation, but to build awareness strong enough to survive uncertainty. Confidence remained essential, but it was now paired with something quieter and more enduring. Disciplined curiosity. Across joint missions in different regions and different conflicts, this shared evolution continued to prove its value. Situations emerged where patience prevented ambush, where deception avoided open battle, and where understanding local patterns mattered more than firepower. In those moments, the lessons born from a single uncomfortable exercise revealed their true worth. Lives were protected not by pride, but by preparation shaped through humility. Veterans sometimes spoke about the difference between strength you can see and strength you can feel. Visible strength is impressive. It moves fast, strikes hard, and commands attention. Felt strength is different. It is the calm certainty that comes from knowing the environment, predicting outcomes, and controlling events before they unfold. The British Commandos had demonstrated that quieter form of power, and the Americans had learned to carry it alongside their own intensity. Together, those qualities created something stronger than either alone. For audiences who follow stories like these, on Clandestine Combat, the deeper meaning reaches beyond military units or historical moments. It touches on a universal principle. Real mastery begins where ego ends. The willingness to learn from discomfort, to respect an unexpected lesson, and to grow without public recognition is what separates temporary success from lasting excellence. These are not just battlefield truths. They are human ones. As years turned into decades, the original encounter faded from direct memory, yet its influence remained woven into doctrine, training, culture, and quiet professional respect between allies. Many who benefited from its lessons never knew the full story. They only experienced better planning, stronger teamwork, and decisions shaped by awareness rather than assumption. That is often how the most important changes in history work, felt everywhere, explained almost nowhere. And perhaps that is fitting, because the true legacy of that moment was never meant to be famous. Its purpose was never applause or recognition. Its purpose was improvement, the kind that saves lives in silence and leaves behind nothing except missions completed and soldiers who return home. Silence, in many ways, became the final teacher. Not the silence of defeat, but the silence that follows understanding. Within elite circles, the loudest lessons are rarely spoken again and again. Instead, they settle into instinct, shaping behavior without needing constant explanation. The encounter between the American forces and the British Commandos slowly transformed into one of those quiet influences never officially highlighted, yet always present in the way missions were planned and risks were judged. Younger operators entering the world of special operations often believed mastery was about pushing harder than anyone else. Training quickly revealed a more complicated truth. Endurance mattered. Skill mattered. Courage mattered. But awareness, deep, patient awareness, often mattered more. The ability to sense danger before it appeared, to recognize patterns others ignored, and to remain calm when pressure demanded speed became defining qualities of the most respected professionals. These were the same qualities that had once shifted the balance during that unforgettable exercise. Instructors sometimes described warfare as a conversation without words. Every movement sends a message. Every pause invites interpretation. The force that understands this silent dialogue gains an advantage long before contact begins. British Commandos had mastered that language through years of precise, low-visibility missions. American operators, shaped by intense combat experience and relentless tempo, brought a different strength to the conversation. When those strengths finally blended, the result was not compromise, it was evolution. Real-world operations in the years that followed reflected this evolution in subtle but powerful ways. Missions became quieter when possible, faster only when necessary, and always guided by deeper preparation. Success was measured less by visible action and more by controlled outcomes. The most effective operations were often the ones the public never heard about, completed without spectacle and understood only by those directly involved. In those unseen moments, the lessons of humility and awareness continued to prove their worth. For viewers listening here on Clandestine Combat, this part of the story carries a meaning that extends far beyond military history. Every field that demands excellence, leadership, strategy, survival, even personal growth, contains the same hidden challenge. The greatest obstacle is rarely the opponent in front of us. It is the assumption inside us that believes we already know enough. Once that assumption is challenged, real progress begins. That is why the memory of this encounter still resonates, even among those who were never there. It reminds us that strength without reflection becomes fragile, while strength shaped by learning becomes enduring. The Americans did not simply regret a challenge, they transformed because of it. The British Commandos did not simply demonstrate superiority. They contributed to a shared improvement that strengthened both sides. And in the end, that shared improvement became the true victory, one measured not in points scored during an exercise, but in lives protected during the dangerous realities that followed. By the time the story had passed fully into quiet tradition, its sharpest edges had softened into wisdom. Among professionals, this is often how meaningful experiences survive. The details fade, the locations blur, even the names disappear. But the lesson remains clear enough to guide decisions years later. Operators preparing for missions they could not discuss still carried an awareness, shaped by that long ago encounter in awareness that reminded them to question confidence, to respect subtlety, and to prepare for the unexpected even when everything appeared under control. In high-risk environments, small differences in thinking create enormous differences in outcome. A single overlooked angle, an assumed safe route, or an underestimated opponent can shift the balance in seconds. The Americans who once felt the quiet precision of the British Commandos understood this more deeply than before. They learned to slow their thinking without slowing their action, to remain aggressive without becoming predictable, and to treat uncertainty not as weakness, but as information waiting to be understood. These refinements were invisible to outsiders, yet they shaped the success of operations that would never be publicly connected to the original lesson. Respect between Allied forces continued to grow through shared deployments and joint planning. Competition had matured into trust, the kind of trust earned only when lives depend on each other. Soldiers who once measured themselves against one another now measured success together. Different traditions, different training methods, and different tactical instincts blended into a stronger collective capability. What began as a moment of regret had quietly become a foundation for cooperation that extended far beyond a single exercise. For those reflecting on the story today, its emotional core remains surprisingly human. Pride, surprise, humility, and growth are not limited to battlefields. They are experiences recognized in every demanding pursuit. The discomfort of realizing we were wrong can feel sharp in the moment, yet it often becomes the doorway to lasting improvement. The encounter between these elite forces endures because it captures that universal turning point, the instant when certainty gives way to understanding. Here on Clandestine Combat, stories like this are not told simply to revisit the past. They are told to reveal the hidden processes that shape excellence in the present. Behind every successful mission, every effective leader, and every quiet act of courage lies a chain of hard lessons learned long before the critical moment arrived. Most of those lessons are never seen. Some are never spoken. But all of them matter. And as this story approaches its final reflection, one truth stands above the rest. Strength alone is temporary. Reputation alone is fragile. Even victory, if it stops growth, can become a hidden weakness. What endures is the willingness to learn, especially when learning begins with discomfort. That willingness is what transformed regret into readiness, rivalry into respect, and a single difficult exercise into a legacy carried forward by generations who understood its meaning without ever needing to witness it themselves. The final lesson of that encounter lies in perspective. In the heat of any challenge, it is easy to focus on immediate results, to measure success by speed, dominance, or visible gains. But the Americans who faced the British Commandos discovered something far more lasting. The true measure of an elite force is not how it performs when conditions favor it, but how it adapts when the unexpected unfolds. They learned that preparation, patience, and understanding are just as vital as skill, courage, and firepower. And those realizations shaped not only the individuals involved, but entire approaches to special operations for years to come. Even decades later, the story resonates in professional circles not as a tale of embarrassment, but as a demonstration of disciplined even. Modern operators study similar exercises and extracting principles from every outcome, whether triumph or setback. They understand that complacency is the enemy, and that pride without reflection is vulnerability. The scenario between the American forces and British Commandos became a benchmark, a quiet example of how humility and awareness amplify strength. Lessons from that single encounter quietly guided countless decisions in missions where mistakes could not be forgiven, where thinking too fast or assuming too much could cost lives. For viewers following Clandestine Combat, this story carries a timeless truth that extends beyond the battlefield. Every high-pressure situation, every leadership decision, and every attempt to excel in life or work contains the same hidden challenge: to recognize the limits of what you think you know, to adjust quickly, and to respect the unseen forces shaping the environment. Those who master this skill gain a power far more durable than raw strength or bravado. They gain foresight. Before we end, remember to like this video and subscribe to Clandestine Combat if you haven't already, so you never miss another story that dives deep into the hidden layers of history, warfare, and strategy. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever faced a moment where confidence turned into humility, only to become growth? How did it change the way you approach challenges? Your stories inspire others, and the conversation makes lessons like these even more powerful. In the end, the encounter between elite American operators and British Commandos is more than history. It is a lesson in human capability, adaptability, and respect. It reminds us that true mastery is earned quietly, tested under pressure, and strengthened by the willingness to learn when the unexpected arrives. The strength of one soldier, one team, or one strategy may impress for a moment, but enduring success belongs to those who evolve, who reflect, and who carry the lessons forward just as these forces did, quietly shaping the future of elite warfare and leaving a legacy that continues to teach, inspire, and challenge us today.